Hey guys! Tonight we're stepping back in time, right into the heart of a medieval Europe still reeling from the most devastating catastrophe it had ever known, the Black Death. But we're not going to focus on the common folk struggling to survive. We're going to put you in the gilded shoes of a noble. You might think being a lord or lady meant you were safe. Above the fray, think again. Because while the plague ravaged the peasantry, it's true. Insidious blow was to the very foundations of your power, paving the way for a terrifying new threat, a peasant revolt. Imagine your ancestral castle, once a symbol of unassailable authority, suddenly becoming a target. This wasn't just a bad day at the office. This was your entire world imploding. If you lived then, being a noble during a peasant revolt caused by plague would have sucked. Probably more than you can possibly imagine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand on the battlements of your ancestral castle, looking out over your lands. The fields, once teeming with serfs toiling under the watchful eye of your bailiff, are eerily quiet. The smoke from distant cottages, once a sign of life, is now sparse, or entirely absent. This is the grim reality of a crumbling foundation, the plague's aftermath. And you, a noble accustomed to unquestioned authority, are witnessing your carefully constructed world begin to crack under the devastating demographic impact of the Black Death. Imagine the sheer scale of the population loss. Your family, your lineage, has likely suffered. Perhaps a favorite cousin, a beloved aunt, or even a younger sibling has succumbed to the Black Sickness. But the true systemic blow is to your peasantry, the very foundation of your wealth and power, before the plague. There were too many peasants and too little land. Now, the opposite is true. Villages that once housed hundreds might now count only dozens of emaciated survivors. Entire hamlets are simply gone, vanished from the map, leaving behind empty hovels and fallow fields. Your wealth, your status, your entire existence depends on the labor of these peasants. They work your lands, pay you rents in coin or kind, and provide the manpower for your armies. But now, the vital hands that plowed your fields, harvested your crops, and baked your bread are gone. The delicate balance of the feudal system, which has sustained your family for generations, is shattering before your very eyes. You walk through your grand halls, the silence amplified by the absence of bustling servants. Knowing that the very source of your comfort and power is rapidly diminishing, one common historical fact is that the Black Death killed millions. What is often overlooked, however, is the immediate and profound demographic shock to the feudal system, where the death of peasants directly translated into a catastrophic loss of the labor force that underpinned noble wealth and power. This wasn't just a humanitarian crisis, it was an economic and social earthquake for the nobility. A more obscure detail is how some nobles, initially desperate to maintain their workforce, resorted to desperate, even cruel, measures. This included forcibly preventing their remaining serfs from leaving the manor, or even attempting to re-enserf peasants who had previously gained some measure of freedom. You might find yourself issuing such desperate decrees, knowing deep down that they are unenforceable in the face of widespread death and the new, terrifying power of scarcity. Historians still debate whether the immediate economic disruption caused by the plague, leading to labor shortages, inevitably fostered social rebellion, or if it merely accelerated pre-existing tensions between lords and peasants that would have erupted anyway. Did the plague cause the revolts, or merely provide the catalyst and opportunity? You might ponder, if the foundations of your power were already too brittle to withstand such a shock. Your immediate problem is labor scarcity. Who will work your fields? Who will pay your rents? The survivors, sensing their newfound leverage, are already demanding higher wages, better conditions, and even outright freedom from serfdom. They are no longer a faceless, easily replaced mass. They are a scarce, valuable commodity. You see your bailiff tearing his hair out, trying to find enough hands for the harvest, knowing that if the crops rot in the fields, your own coffers will soon be empty. The very concept of noble authority, rooted in the protection and provision for your peasants, begins to unravel. How can you protect them from an invisible plague? How can you provide for them when your own resources are dwindling? The moral contract that underlay the feudal system is being renegotiated by death itself, leaving you, the noble, in a precarious and increasingly vulnerable position. This crumbling foundation is not just an inconvenience, it's an existential threat. The plague has not only killed your peasants, it has inadvertently empowered the survivors, setting the stage for a social upheaval that will shake your world far more profoundly than any disease. You feel the ground shifting beneath your feet, and the familiar landscape of your power is rapidly disappearing. You're looking out at the empty fields, and the silence of the dead peasants seems louder than any sound. The plague's devastation has shaken the very foundation of your power, and now you face a new, far more direct threat: labor lost. Power threatened, serfdom's end. You grapple with economic upheaval as the surviving peasantry gains unprecedented leverage, demanding freedom and shattering the social order you've always known. Imagine your remaining peasants. Before the plague, they were your property, bound by law and tradition to work your land in exchange for protection. But now, the survivors aren't mere serfs anymore, they are precious, scarce commodities. Every man, woman, and child who remains is worth many times more than before. You see them looking at you with a new gaze, no longer the old subservience, but a quiet defiance, a dawning awareness of their own value. Your immediate problem is a severe labor shortage. Who will plow your fields? Who will harvest your crops? Who will tend your livestock? The vast estates, once symbols of your wealth, now lie idle, threatening to become wilderness if left untended. Your income, based on the produce of the land and peasant rents, is dwindling rapidly. You find yourself growing poorer, your wealth existing only on paper without the hands to generate actual produce. As these peasants realize their new position, they begin to make unprecedented demands. They ask for higher wages, a larger share of the harvest, or, most terrifyingly for you, freedom from serfdom. They want to leave your land to seek better conditions elsewhere, or to lease land for themselves. You, accustomed to giving orders, now find yourself having to negotiate, or face the risk of losing your entire remaining workforce. One common historical fact is that the Black Death led to the decline of serfdom. However, what is often overlooked is the existential crisis for the nobility as their economic base crumbled and their traditional authority was challenged by the very people they had ruled. This wasn't merely a change, it was a direct threat to your way of life and your very identity. A more obscure detail is that some nobles, in a desperate attempt to maintain their status, tried to revive old laws or create new ones to bind peasants to their land. Sometimes by force, you might find yourself issuing such desperate decrees, ordering runaway peasants to return, only to see your commands ignored or met with outright disobedience. This impotence is a crushing blow to your power. Historians still debate whether the collapse of serfdom was an inevitable process merely hastened by the Black Death, or if the labor shortages caused by the plague created a genuine social revolution that would not have occurred otherwise. Was the plague simply a catalyst, or was it the primary driver of this unprecedented social change? You might ponder if your power's foundations were already rotting long before the plague exposed them. The economic pressure is immense. You still have to maintain your castle, pay the few remaining servants and soldiers, and uphold the appearance of power. Even as your income dries up, you might find yourself forced to sell off assets, pawn family jewels, or even part with portions of your land, just to keep up appearances. The life of luxury and ease you once knew is slowly slipping away. The lack of labor also impacts your military capabilities. If you are a lord, you struggle to raise enough men to form an effective fighting force, or to guard your property. The threat from brigands or rival lords increases as your pool of defenders shrinks. You feel vulnerable, weaker than ever before. The fear of losing control is a constant companion. Your peasants, whom you once viewed as a static part of the landscape, have now become a dynamic element, a source of potential instability. The slightest disobedience is a reminder that your authority is no longer absolute. The crisis wrought by the plague has revealed the fragility of the feudal order. You, as a noble, are not merely facing a disease that killed your peasants. You are confronting a seismic shift in the social structure, one that threatens to wipe your entire class from history. You're seeing the cracks in your noble world widen, as the loss of labor and the shifting power dynamics bring a new, more dangerous tension to your lands. This is where you feel rising tensions the unrest brews, a palpable sense of growing resentment from the common people, fueled by the economic shifts of the plague's aftermath and lingering class injustices. Imagine the air on your estate. It no longer hums with the familiar sounds of deference and obedience. Instead, there's a subtle, unsettling hum of discontent. You overhear hushed conversations among the few remaining peasants, their voices lower, their gazes less direct. They speak of fairness, of their newfound value, of the Lord's diminishing power. This isn't outright rebellion yet, but it's a slow, simmering brew of resentment, bubbling just beneath the surface of the polite feudal order. The economic changes, which empower the survivors, remember from Part 2, the labor shortage, directly clash with your ingrained sense of noble privilege. You're accustomed to extracting labor and rents. Now, your former serfs demand wages, demand freedom, demand rights. You might issue decrees attempting to fix wages at pre-plague levels, or to reimpose old feudal obligations. These attempts are met not with swift obedience, but with quiet defiance, with slowdowns, or even with open refusal. This insolence, once unthinkable, is a direct challenge to your authority, and it fills you with a mix of frustration and growing alarm, the memory of the plague itself, while a shared trauma, also becomes a source of resentment. Many peasants remember how nobles often fled the cities or their estates to avoid the sickness, leaving them to die. They recall the lack of aid, the unburied dead, the broken promises. This feeling of abandonment during their darkest hour fuels a bitter anger. You, the noble, who was supposed to protect them, were perceived by some as having left them to their fate. One common historical fact is that economic changes after the Black Death led to social unrest. What is often overlooked, however, is how the nobility's stubborn resistance to adapting to the new economic realities directly fueled peasant resentment and contributed to the eventual explosions of violence. Your class's attempts to cling to old privileges, despite the demographic shift, intensified the brewing storm. A more obscure detail is the phenomenon of wandering laborers, peasants who, having survived the plague, abandoned their traditional manorial ties to seek higher wages and better conditions elsewhere. This deliberate flouting of feudal obligations, sometimes in defiance of explicit noble decrees, was a powerful, silent form of protest that deeply angered the lords, who saw it as a direct threat to their control and economic stability. You might send out riders to forcibly return them, only to find they've vanished into the vast, depopulated landscape. Historians still debate whether the peasant revolts were primarily an economic struggle for better wages and conditions, or if they were also driven by a deeper desire for social justice, equality, and a challenge to the entire feudal hierarchy. Was it about bread and butter, or was it about dignity and a fundamental shift in power? You might ponder if the anger runs deeper than mere coin. Religious interpretations also play a part. Some radical preachers, themselves survivors of the plague, begin to preach messages of social equality, arguing that God had leveled the playing field, making all men equal in death. They suggest that if God cared not for noble birth during the plague, Then why should peasants defer to lords now? These sermons, circulating among the common folk, provide a powerful ideological justification for their growing discontent. You hear unsettling rumors of these new, dangerous doctrines spreading through your villages, the very symbols of your power, your castle, your coat of arms, your fine clothes, become targets of this simmering resentment. They are no longer seen as symbols of protection and rightful authority, but as emblems of the very oppression and inequality that the plague has now so cruelly highlighted. You feel their eyes on your fine silks, on your armed retainers, sensing the malice beneath their polite bows. The underlying tension makes every interaction fraught. A simple request for taxes, a demand for labor, or a judgment in your manorial court now carries an unspoken weight. You sense the precariousness of your position, the growing fragility of your authority. The peasants, once passive, are awakening to their collective strength, a terrifying new force born from the ashes of the plague. This growing unrest is not a distant rumor. It's a palpable presence on your very doorstep, threatening to engulf your world in fire and fury. You're watching the simmering discontent reach a boiling point, and the air around your estate crackles with dangerous energy. This is where the spark ignites from discontent to uprising, as the frustrations, resentments, and newfound leverage of the peasantry explode into open rebellion, abandoning their fields for violence and directing their fury squarely at you. The nobility, imagine the news reaching your ears, whispers, then shouts, then undeniable reports peasants from a neighboring village have refused to pay their rents. Then, they've seized the local lord's grain. Then, they've set fire to his manor. This isn't just a localized dispute, it's a contagion of defiance, spreading faster than the plague itself. The individual acts of insolence, which you dismissed as isolated incidents, have coalesced into a terrifying, unified movement. The grievances are clear. The peasants demand an end to serfdom, lower taxes, higher wages, and justice for the perceived wrongs committed by their lords. They believe the plague was a divine judgment against the corrupt wealthy, and that they, the survivors, are meant to build a new, more equitable world. Their anger is raw, fueled by generations of oppression, and now, by the profound sense of abandonment they felt during the plague. You, the noble, are the embodiment of everything they despise. You hear reports of charismatic, often radical, leaders emerging from among the common folk. Preachers like John Ball, fiery and articulate, are spreading messages of social equality when Adam delved and Eve span. Who was then the gentleman? These revolutionary ideas, once confined to hushed conversations, are now shouted in angry sermons, galvanizing the masses and providing a powerful ideological backbone to their rebellion. You dismiss them as mere rabble-rousers, but their words resonate with a desperate populace. One common historical fact is that peasant revolts occurred after the Black Death. What is often overlooked, however, is the speed and intensity with which localized grievances could escalate into widespread, organized uprisings, surprising and overwhelming the established noble order. The transition from simmering resentment to open, violent rebellion often felt sudden and catastrophic to the nobility. A more obscure detail is that in some peasant revolts, the rebels explicitly targeted and destroyed manorial records, charters, rent rolls, and legal documents that recorded their feudal obligations and debts to their lords. This wasn't mere vandalism, it was a highly symbolic and practical act aimed at literally erasing the legal basis of their serfdom and the lord's power. Imagine your bailiff frantically trying to safeguard these precious documents, knowing their destruction means the obliteration of your claims. Historians still debate whether the violence of the peasant revolts was primarily a spontaneous outburst of long-suppressed anger, or if there was a more calculated, strategic element to their actions, aimed at dismantling the feudal system from within. Was it raw emotion, or a nascent form of class warfare? That drove the destruction you might ponder, if their fury is as unthinking as you wish to believe. The instruments of their revolt are simple, yet terrifyingly effective. Farm tools, Scythes, pitchforks, axes are now weapons. What they lack in training, they make up for in sheer numbers and desperate fury. They march not in disciplined ranks, but as a swelling, vengeful tide, sweeping through the countryside, engulfing manor houses, destroying symbols of noble authority, and often brutally attacking or killing the nobles themselves, their bailiffs or tax collectors. You might try to muster your own retainers, your small force of armed men, but even your knights and men-at-arms, though better trained, are few in number compared to the angry hordes. Moreover, they might be reluctant to fight their own countrymen, their former neighbors, or even fear the very plague that decimated the peasant ranks. The loyalty of your own forces feels suddenly precarious. The very concept of your feudal superiority is under attack. For generations, you have been the unquestioned master, the rightful authority. Now, those whom you ruled are rising up, openly defying you, threatening your life and your family. The world is turning upside down, and the traditional order that defined your existence is crumbling under the raw, violent force of peasant fury. This is not a distant problem. It's on your doorstep. The smoke from burning manor houses is visible on the horizon. The distant rumble of angry shouts grows louder each day. The spark has ignited, and the fire of rebellion, fueled by plague and injustice, threatens to consume your entire world. You're watching the countryside erupt in a terrifying inferno of rebellion, and the once distant threat is now a horrifying reality knocking on your gates. This is your estate under siege, no safe haven, as you confront the chilling truth that your ancestral manor house, once a symbol of unassailable power, has now become a direct target for the enraged peasantry. Imagine standing within your castle walls, a place that has stood for centuries, designed to repel invading armies. Not the very people who once tilled your fields. Yet outside, a swelling mob, not of foreign knights but of your own former tenants, approaches. Their numbers are daunting, their faces contorted with rage, their weapons crude but effective. Scythes, axes, pitchforks, even simple cudgels. The comforting stone of your walls suddenly feels thin, vulnerable. The sounds of the siege are terrifyingly intimate. You hear not the organized shouts of a professional army, but the raw, guttural roars of a furious crowd. The rhythmic thudding of improvised battering rams against your gate sends vibrations through the very stone beneath your feet. The air fills with the acrid smell of smoke from burning outbuildings. Your barns, your stables, perhaps even the cottages of those who refuse to join the rebellion. This destruction is intensely personal, targeting the very infrastructure of your wealth and daily life. Your defenses, designed for conventional warfare, are ill-suited for this kind of uprising. Your few remaining men-at-arms, weakened by the plague themselves or perhaps hesitant to fight their own countrymen, look nervous. They are loyal to you? Yes, but their numbers are woefully inadequate against the sheer mass of the angry peasants. Every loophole in your fortifications, every unguarded window, becomes a glaring vulnerability. One common historical fact is that noble estates were attacked during peasant revolts. What is often overlooked, however, is the profound psychological shock and betrayal experienced by the nobility when their own peasants, whom they believed were rightfully subservient, turned against them with such unbridled fury. It wasn't just a military attack, it was a deeply personal violation of the feudal contract. A more obscure detail is that during some sieges, rebellious peasants would meticulously destroy or deface symbols of noble authority outside the manor house before even attempting to breach the walls. This could include tearing down the lord's gallows, smashing his manorial millstones, or even desecrating the family's hunting grounds. These symbolic acts were designed to dismantle the visual and practical apparatus of feudal power, sending a clear, terrifying message to the besieged noble inside. You might watch from a high window as your personal emblems are systematically obliterated. Historians still debate whether the peasants' decision to directly attack noble castles and manor houses was a strategic move aimed at decapitating the feudal system. or primarily an emotional outlet for accumulated rage and a desire for vengeance against perceived oppressors? Was it a calculated act of war or a furious, spontaneous eruption of long-suppressed anger? You might ponder if their fury is as unthinking as you wish to believe. The threat inside the walls is almost as terrifying as the one outside. You scan the faces of your remaining household staff. Are they truly loyal, or do they secretly sympathize with the rebels? Could one of them open a gate, poison your food, or betray your position? The absolute trust you once held in your servants is shattered, replaced by a gnawing suspicion that makes every interaction fraught with anxiety. Your own home, once your sanctuary, feels like a cage. The supplies within your castle, usually abundant, now seem pitifully scarce. The plague has disrupted trade, and you might have been unable to replenish your stores. Water from the well, food from the pantry, every morsel becomes precious. Stretched thin among your dwindling household, the idea of a long siege fills you with dread, knowing that starvation, rather than direct assault, might be your ultimate undoing. As the siege continues, you feel a profound sense of isolation. No aid is coming from other nobles or the king, at least not yet. Every passing day intensifies the feeling that you are utterly alone, besieged by your own people, in your own ancestral home. The very foundations of your power are crumbling, and the castle walls, once symbols of strength, now feel like the thin skin of a drum, vibrating with the furious rhythm of rebellion. You're standing on the ramparts, facing the unbelievable fury of the very people you once ruled. This is the face of fury peasants at your gate, and you are now seeing your common folk, now an enraged mob, threatening your very life and family. Imagine looking down from the stone wall, not into the unfamiliar faces of an enemy, but into the familiar visages of your own peasants. There's Thomas, the blacksmith your father gave land to. There's Agnes, the wife of the cotter who used to bake bread for your household. And there's William, the young man you once saw playing in the village. Now, their faces are contorted with rage, their eyes burning with a personal hatred. They are not just an anonymous mob, they are individuals whose names you once knew. And their fury feels like a personal betrayal. The shouts rise from below. Freedom. No more serfdom. Death to the nobles. These words crash against your ears, not just as threats, but as a complete rejection of the social order into which you were born. They wield scythes, pitchforks, and axes. The tools of rural life now transformed into deadly weapons. You see their calloused hands, the very hands that once sowed your fields, now reaching towards your wall, hungry for vengeance. What makes this sight even more terrifying is the complete reversal of social standing. Just months ago, you were their lord, their protector, their ruler. Your authority was unquestioned. Now, you are the target of their wrath, and they no longer fear you. This inversion is a profound shock, shaking your sense of identity and your place in the world. One common historical fact is that peasant revolts occurred. What is often overlooked, however, is the deep psychological shock suffered by the nobility when confronted by the rage of their own common people, whom they had considered subservient and easily managed. This was not merely a physical attack. It was a profound violation of social norms and the long-held class system. A more obscure detail is that in some revolts, the peasants would taunt the besieged nobles by carrying stolen or desecrated symbols of their noble authority. Perhaps a torn banner, a damaged piece of armor, or even a stolen portrait of the noble family. These symbolic acts were designed to humiliate and demoralize those under siege, visually demonstrating that their power was now held by the very people they had ruled. You might spot one of these symbols hoisted on a pitchfork, a terrifying reminder of your own degradation. Historians still debate whether the brutality of the peasant revolts was a direct result of the extreme oppression they had endured for centuries, or if it was a more chaotic, violent reaction to the breakdown of social order caused by the plague. Was their fury justified, Or was it an unorganized, destructive outburst? You might ponder if the rage in their eyes is a mirror of your own failures. You feel a primal fear. This is not the fear of death on a field of honor. This is the fear of a dishonorable death, torn apart by an angry mob who adhere to no rules of chivalry. You know that if they breach the walls, no quarter will be given, no pleas heard. You order your men to loose arrows or cast stones. You see some of the mob fall, but their numbers seem never-ending. For everyone who falls, 2 more seem to appear, surging forward with renewed fury. Their persistence is terrifying, a sign that they have been pushed to their absolute limits, and now have nothing left to lose. This face of fury is not just an attack on your castle, it is an assault on your very being, on everything you believe to be true about your place in the world. It is a brutal reminder that your power, once thought divinely ordained, is now being challenged by the calloused hands of your own peasants. You're trapped within your ancestral walls, facing the enraged faces of your former subjects. And now, a chilling new layer of fear permeates your very sanctuary. This is betrayal from within your own servants, as you discover the horrifying disloyalty of your household staff, some of whom might actively join the revolt. Turning your closest allies into your most dangerous enemies, imagine the faces of your household staff. Old Martha, who cooked for your family for decades. Young Thomas, the stable boy you saw grow up, your trusted chamberlain, who managed your accounts. You've always seen them as loyal, integral parts of your noble life, bound by duty and custom. But as the peasant revolt rages outside, a terrifying question gnaws at your mind: whose side are they truly on? The first signs might be subtle. A servant disappearing without explanation, a whispered conversation overheard in the kitchen, food taking longer to arrive, or a distinct lack of urgency in carrying out your commands. You find yourself scrutinizing every glance, every gesture, searching for signs of disaffection. The very people who once served you with diligence now become objects of intense suspicion. Your castle, once a haven of loyalty, feels suddenly permeable, its inner sanctum vulnerable. The betrayal can be devastatingly direct. You might discover a hidden gate unlocked, a message smuggled to the rebels, or even a direct act of sabotage. Perhaps a servant deliberately poisons your meager food stores, or sabotages your few remaining weapons. This isn't just disloyalty, it's a profound violation of trust, shattering your sense of security and leaving you isolated even within your own home. The idea that someone you fed and sheltered could turn against you with such malice is a bitter pill to swallow. One common historical fact is that servants were part of noble households. What is often overlooked, however, is the profound psychological impact of betrayal from within during peasant revolts, where the very individuals relied upon for daily life became a hidden threat, undermining noble authority from the inside out and forcing a terrifying re-evaluation of trust. A more obscure detail is how some rebellious peasants, knowing the layout of a noble's home from former service, would actively exploit this knowledge during a siege. They might communicate with sympathetic servants inside, coordinating breaches, identifying weak points, or even leading the mob to hidden treasures or escape routes known only to the household staff. Imagine a former scullery maid, now part of the angry throng, pointing out a little-used postern gate or a vulnerable pantry window. Historians still debate whether the instances of servant betrayal during peasant revolts were primarily acts of genuine class solidarity and revolutionary fervor, or desperate opportunism driven by fear and the promise of reward from the rebels. Did these servants truly believe in the peasant cause, or were they simply seeking self-preservation in a chaotic world? You might ponder the complex motivations that drive people in times of extreme social upheaval. The motivation for their betrayal can be complex. Some servants might genuinely sympathize with the peasant cause, having family or friends among the rebels, or sharing the same long-standing grievances against the nobility. Others might be coerced, threatened by the mob with violence if they don't cooperate. Still others might simply be opportunists, seeing a chance to escape a life of servitude or to gain wealth and status in the new. Chaotic order. This internal threat forces you into a state of heightened paranoia. You begin to question everyone. Who can you trust to guard your family? Who will prepare your meals? The sheer mental exhaustion of living under this cloud of suspicion, constantly evaluating every glance and whisper, is almost as debilitating as the physical siege. Your home, once a sanctuary, transforms into a prison where every face is a potential enemy. The breakdown of loyalty among your servants is a stark reminder of how deeply the plague has fractured society. The traditional bonds of feudalism, which once tied peasant to lord and servant to master, have been irrevocably broken by death. Fear, and the sudden shift in the balance of power. Your authority, once absolute, is now challenged not just from outside your walls, but from within your very household. This betrayal from within is a particularly bitter blow, turning your own people against you, and adding a chilling dimension to your siege. It's a testament to the fact that during a peasant revolt, the most dangerous enemies might be closer than you think, hidden behind a facade of subservience, waiting for their moment to strike. You're a noble under siege, your own servants perhaps conspiring against you, and the roar of the peasant mob grows louder. At a certain point, the grim reality sets in: your castle is no longer defensible, or the risk of staying is too great. This is where you face flight and pursuit, the noble's desperate escape. A harrowing, undignified scramble from your lands. Hunted by your former subjects, imagine the agonizing decision. The siege has lasted days, perhaps weeks. Supplies are dwindling. Your few loyal men-at-arms are exhausted, some wounded. The walls feel thinner. Your bailiff might report a new breach, or perhaps a secret passage has been discovered. The only option left is to flee, to abandon your ancestral home and everything you possess. In a desperate bid for survival, this is not a strategic retreat. It's a terrifying, humiliating escape. You gather your immediate family, your spouse, your children, perhaps a loyal retainer or two. You leave behind your rich tapestries, your family portraits, your inherited plate. Everything that defines your noble status. There's no time to pack, no time for dignity. You must move quickly, silently, under the cover of darkness or a diversion. You might slip out through a hidden postern gate, or lower yourselves from a remote tower window, your fine clothes snagging on rough stone. This undignified scramble is a stark contrast to the ceremonial exits you're accustomed to. The flight itself is terrifying. You are not riding proudly at the head of an army. You are sneaking through the very lands you once commanded. Now hostile territory. Every shadow seems to hold a rebel. Every distant bark of a dog sends a jolt of fear through you. You avoid main roads, opting for treacherous paths through woods and swamps, places you usually wouldn't deign to tread. Your horses, if you have any, are ridden hard, their hooves muffled against the rough ground. One common historical fact is that some nobles fled during revolts. What is often overlooked, however, is the profound humiliation and psychological trauma of abandoning everything and being hunted by one's own former subjects. This wasn't merely a tactical withdrawal, it was a personal and symbolic capitulation, stripping nobles of their dignity and status in the most brutal way. A more obscure detail is how some fleeing nobles, desperate to avoid detection, would often disguise themselves as common peasants, wearing rough tunics and cloaks, abandoning their fine silks and jewels. Imagine a lord or lady, once impeccably dressed, now deliberately covered in dirt, trying to mimic the gait and speech of the common folk they once commanded, fearing recognition that could lead to a brutal death. This enforced humility was a truly bitter pill. Historians still debate whether the decision to flee during a peasant revolt was always a sign of cowardice, or if it was a pragmatic, often necessary, choice to preserve one's life and potentially rally aid later. Given the overwhelming numbers of the rebels, was it a shameful retreat, or a strategic necessity? That defined these desperate escapes. You might ponder how circumstances redefine courage. The pursuit is relentless. The rebels, fueled by fury and a desire for vengeance, often send out parties to hunt down fleeing nobles. They know the local terrain better than you do. They have sympathizers in every village. You might hear the distant baying of dogs, or the shouts of your former tenants closing in. Every rustle in the bushes, every snapped twig, sends adrenaline coursing through your veins. You are the prey, and your own people are the hunters. The psychological toll is immense. You are perpetually on edge, exhausted, hungry, and terrified. The images of your burning estate, the angry faces of the mob, and the fear for your family's safety haunt your every step. You constantly reevaluate your choices, wondering if you should have fought, if you should have stayed, if there was any other way. The dignity of your noble birth feels like a distant memory, replaced by the raw, desperate instinct for survival. Even if you manage to evade your pursuers, the destination is uncertain. You are fleeing to another noble's castle, hoping they haven't fallen, hoping they will offer refuge. You arrive, perhaps disguised, filthy, and exhausted, a shadow of your former self, a living testament to the destructive power of the peasant's rage. Your world has been turned upside down, and you are left with nothing but your life, and the terrifying memories of your desperate flight. You've made a harrowing, undignified escape from your burning estate, leaving everything behind. Now, as you flee, your desperate hope lies with the highest authority in the land. This is where you face seeking royal aid, a throne in crisis. As you discover the king's own precarious position, often unable to offer immediate, decisive protection against the widespread peasant fury. Imagine finally reaching a royal city, perhaps dusty and exhausted from days of flight. You expect to find a strong, centralized power, ready to dispatch knights and quell the rebellion. Instead, you find a monarch whose authority is also deeply shaken by the plague and the subsequent unrest. The king's resources are stretched thin, his own coffers diminished, and his traditional sources of military manpower, often drawn from the very nobility now under siege, are severely depleted. You plead your case before the king or his council, describing the burning of your manor, the defiance of your peasants, the sheer scale of the chaos. You demand justice. Demand military aid to reclaim your lands and punish the rebels. But you are met not with immediate action, but with weary resignation, political maneuvering, or even outright impotence. The king, too, has likely lost vast swathes of his own lands and revenues, and his central authority is weakened. The problem isn't just your rebellion, it's a multitude of uprisings sweeping across the kingdom. News arrives daily of other nobles besieged, other castles burned, other cities in chaos. The king cannot be everywhere at once. His loyal armies, if he has any substantial ones left, are either too few, too scattered, or already engaged in putting down other revolts. You realize, with a chilling dread, that your king might be as vulnerable as you are, his throne teetering on the brink of collapse. One common historical fact is that nobles appealed to the king during revolts. What is often overlooked, however, is the debilitating weakness of royal authority after a widespread plague, which left monarchs struggling to enforce their will and protect their nobility, exacerbating the chaos and prolonging the revolts. The very top of the feudal pyramid was itself crumbling. A more obscure detail is how the king's reliance on mercenary armies, which became more common after the plague decimated feudal levies, sometimes complicated the response to peasant revolts. These mercenaries, while effective fighters, were expensive and often lacked the loyalty or local knowledge to swiftly put down widespread, decentralized uprisings across unfamiliar territories. You might see the king's mercenaries, looking formidable but perhaps unsuited for the messy, brutal work of suppressing your former tenants. Historians still debate whether the monarchy's initial slow or ineffective response to peasant revolts was due to genuine military incapacity, or if it was also a calculated political decision to allow some peasant demands to be met, especially those beneficial to the crown. Like weakening powerful lords before reasserting royal control? Did the king simply lack the power? Or did he strategically choose his battles in a crisis? You might ponder if you're a pawn in a larger game. The king's own court might be riddled with factionalism and infighting. Other nobles, perhaps rivals, might use your misfortune to gain favor or territory. There's no unified, immediate response. You might be told to wait, to gather more evidence, or to return to your lands and try to negotiate. All while your home continues to burn and your peasants roam free. The bureaucracy of power moves glacially slowly. Even as your world collapses rapidly, the cost of raising an army is immense, and the king might demand contributions from the remaining nobility, further depleting your already meager resources. You are expected to contribute to your own salvation, even if you have nothing left to give. This financial burden, coupled with the uncertainty of aid, adds another layer of stress to your desperate situation. The long-term impact on the king's legitimacy is also profound. If the king cannot protect his nobility, if he cannot maintain order, then the very foundation of his rule is questioned. This weakens the entire feudal structure, emboldening both rebellious peasants and ambitious rival nobles. You see the subtle cracks in the throne itself, realizing that the plague's devastation has undermined not just your own authority, but the very system of monarchy. This plea for royal aid, often met with delays, weakness, or political calculus, highlights the precarious position of even the highest nobility during a widespread peasant revolt caused by plague. You are forced to confront the chilling reality that in times of such profound crisis, even the crown offers no guaranteed sanctuary, and your fate rests on the fragile balance of a shattered kingdom. You've survived the plague, the siege, the flight, and the chilling realization of your king's weakened power. Now, as the dust settles and the fires of rebellion slowly die down, you're left to reckon with a world irrevocably transformed. This is a shattered world the new order dawns, and you reflect on the permanent reshaping of society and the profound loss of noble authority after the revolt. Imagine walking back to your lands. If anything remains, the silence that once marked the plague's devastation now carries a different weight, the quiet of a fundamental social shift. Your castle might be scarred, perhaps even partially ruined, a physical testament to the peasant fury. But the deeper scars are invisible, etched onto the very fabric of society and your class. The old feudal order, which once seemed as solid as your castle walls, is irrevocably broken. The most profound change is the decline of serfdom. The peasants, through their sheer numbers and the power vacuum created by the plague, have won significant concessions. They are no longer bound to the land in the same way. They demand, and often receive, higher wages, the right to move, and more personal freedoms. You are forced to adapt, to negotiate, to treat them less as property and more as valuable. Independent laborers. Your economic power is diminished, rooted now in land ownership rather than absolute control over human lives. Your personal authority, once unquestioned, is permanently eroded. The fear that peasants once held for their lord is replaced by a simmering resentment, a memory of defiance, and a newfound understanding of their collective power. You can no longer rely on simple decree. You must tread carefully, knowing that the threat of future uprisings always lingers. The deferential bows might still be there, but the genuine respect, the ingrained obedience of generations, has vanished. One common historical fact is that peasant revolts had a lasting impact. What is often overlooked, however, is the psychological capitulation of the nobility to a fundamentally altered social contract. You didn't just lose economic power, you lost the unchallenged ideological basis of your authority, leading to a long-term redefinition of your role in society. A more obscure detail is how some surviving nobles, particularly those who managed to retain their lands, began to invest more heavily in sheep farming and wool production, which required significantly less labor than grain cultivation. This shift away from labor-intensive agriculture was a direct adaptation to the post-plague labor shortages and a way to rebuild wealth with fewer peasant hands. Subtly altering the economic landscape of your estate, you might find yourself overseeing vast new pastures. A quiet revolution in land use. Historians still debate whether the peasant revolts, despite their ultimate suppression, were truly a victory for the common people by accelerating the decline of feudalism, or if the initial brutality and widespread destruction led to a more centralized, authoritarian power structure by kings who crushed local noble authority. Did it truly empower the peasants, or did it inadvertently strengthen the crown? You might ponder if your suffering ultimately benefited those above you more than those below. The relationship between the nobility and the monarchy also shifts. Kings, having witnessed the fragility of local noble power and the chaos of widespread revolt, begin to centralize power, creating larger standing armies and more direct control over their territories. Your autonomy as a local lord diminishes, gradually replaced by the king's overarching authority. You might find yourself less of an independent power and more of a regional administrator for a stronger crown. The very concept of nobility is redefined, while titles and land ownership persist. The unchallenged might and absolute control of the pre-plague era are gone. Your life, once primarily focused on managing your estate and preparing for localized skirmishes, now involves more complex economic management, political maneuvering with a stronger crown, and constant vigilance against a newly empowered peasantry. The psychological impact of this shattered world is profound. You carry the memory of the siege, the flight, the betrayal, and the horrifying sight of your peasants turned rebels. Your sense of security, once absolute, is irrevocably broken. You live with the knowledge that the social order is fragile, that the masses can rise, and that your position, once seemingly unassailable, is dependent on a delicate balance of power that can be shattered by a microscopic enemy. This is the new dawn, born from death and rebellion. You are a noble in a world that no longer entirely respects your inherent right to rule. The plague might have passed, but its true legacy is the permanent reshaping of power, leaving you to navigate a shattered world where the old order is gone, and the future is uncertain. The echoes of the peasants' rage, the burning manor, and the crumbling feudal order are softly fading now. Merging with the gentle hum of your fan, you've journeyed through the profound, unsettling experience of being a noble caught in a social earthquake. A stark reminder that even privilege offers no shield against the deepest currents of history. Let the complexities of power, pestilence, and rebellion gently recede into your mind. Sleep now, knowing that the past was a tumultuous teacher, ensuring a peace in your own time that was once a distant dream for many.